glass in my face here. So first of all, I want to thank the board members that are here and those that are not here for inviting me to come speak, and especially Christina Ferber for putting this together. Thank you, Christina, so much for putting this together. It's an honor to be back here and to be speaking in this sacred space. We're going to be talking this morning about peace, the obstacles to peace, and some bridges to peace. And as I thought about what I was going to say today, I decided there's so many bridges and so many obstacles, but that I would choose some things that I'm seeing currently and have been seeing in my practice that seem to hamper people or stand in their way. So this is a short list, but hopefully something here will be of benefit to you. I think we would all agree that we all want more peace in the world, and that peace is a good thing. I don't think there's anyone here that would not agree with that. However, most of us have very little control or effect or influence over war and peace on this planet. What we do have is complete power and control over the peace that we decide to bring to this planet, to bring to our world, our relationships, and how we decide to do this or not do it. And of course, before we can bring peace into our world, we need to become peaceful inside. So we're going to talk more about how to create that today and a little bit about how we do that in the world. When we talk about how we feel and think about any situation, and then the action that comes from that situation, we are basically talking about how we choose, accent on the word choose, to perceive situations, events, and people around us. That perception creates thoughts. The thoughts create self-talk or a story in our head. And that self-talk creates also our emotions, how we feel in that moment. The two of them together, when they marry together, then we decide on our action or inaction in that moment. So again, it's the perception, the thought, the heart, the feeling, and together we then decide to take an action or not to act. So we are very, very powerful beings. We have a lot of power here. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Eric said that man's freedom, the very last freedom that he has, is his freedom to choose an attitude in any situation. We always have that power. Sometimes people have control over our bodies. Sometimes they have control over our circumstances or even our relationships. But we can always choose in any given situation how we are going to think about that situation and create a feeling about it. Now, we can talk about something very interesting. We can talk about needs. And when we say the word need, just think of it in your head. Just say the word over in your mind, need. And it's a heavy kind of dense feeling. I need this, I need that, I need for you to be a certain way. However, when we shift that a bit to the word preference, we can see that and feel that has a lighter touch to it. And of course, we all have a right to our own opinions, our likes, our dislikes. Nobody's saying that we shouldn't have that. But when it becomes a preference rather than a need, it has a softer touch to it, and we become more flexible. So when we are involved in a relationship with someone else or in a situation, and we don't have to have that person or that situation show up in any certain way, we can become more flexible, and we can then have more choices. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist teacher from Vietnam, said that when we meet an adversary, we should first begin connection by asking them to tell us about their suffering and then listen. Why is that? Because there's a commonness in human suffering. There is a shared experience. I remember the story I heard years ago about the beloved Israeli president, Golda Meir. And she was preparing for her first meeting with the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat. These two countries had never had leaders meet before. And of course, there was a war and a lot of antagonism between them. And he was coming to Israel for the first time. And she made a decision not to meet him in her office at the Knesset, the parliament, with her advisors around her. Instead, she invited him to her very modest home, brought him into the kitchen, gave him fresh coffee and homemade cake, and started asking him about his grandchildren, and asking him about stories about them. And she talked about and shared stories of her grandchildren, and they shared photos. And she said that was at least the first hour or so. And from there, they moved forward. She was smart enough to understand that she needed to find a shared human connection. And they both shared grandparenting. This is very powerful when we think about how do we approach situations and people where we don't see how we can ever come eye to eye. Now, our major religions teach us that peace is a good thing, that it helps us to evolve spiritually, and it's good for our spirit. Medical science teaches us that peace is a wonderful thing because stress and anxiety can cause all kinds of illness, and we have all the medical research now that tells us how many diseases are based on stress and anxiety, right? So we could say this is where religion and science meet. They both agree that peaceful living, peaceful thoughts, staying peaceful inside, and living peacefully is very, very healthy and promotes our evolution as a soul. I think one of the things that can be helpful in this world right now is to cultivate a sense of humor. This can be a crazy place to be right now, but there is nowhere else to go. This is where we live. So we might as well begin to cultivate a sense of humor about it and a sense of humor about ourselves. This will lighten our load and lighten our interactions with others. One of the things that I have found in my practice that I think makes people incredibly anxious and puts unnecessary stress on them and creates disharmony inside is a need to get it right, to be perfect, right? I hear people laughing. So I'm going to give you a revelation this morning. Perfect people don't come to this planet, okay? A few masters have, a few avatars have, but we don't have to worry about it. We won't meet them. Very rarely. So who comes here? People that make lots of mistakes, fall down, get up, and hopefully learn lessons from these mistakes. and are wiser as a result. And that's really what this earth plane is about. Lots of mistakes and lots of lessons and lots of opportunities to grow. Another piece of this is worrying about what other people think about us. And all I'm going to say about that today is I'm going to pose a question for your consideration. Why in the world would you let how you think about yourself be dependent on what someone else is carrying in their head? So let's move on. Let's talk about some other attitudes and challenges that are prevalent right now in our daily life. One is being or feeling controlled by circumstances, events, and people. And the other is controlling circumstances, events, and people. Remember, we always have to look at both sides if we're spiritual, right? So let's start with feeling controlled. There are many situations that we have very little choice over that show up in our life. For me, it's loss of vision. Each one of you has something. Each one of you. Might not be physical, might be emotional, psychological, interpersonal, financial. So what can we do? Well, we're certainly not saying don't do what you can. This is not about doing here. But what it's about is if we can stop, take a breath, relax, and allow the situation to be what it is in that moment. Something amazing happens to us, we're told, in psychology. And that is that the ego mind relaxes somewhat. And when the ego mind relaxes and isn't doing its constant talking to us, frightening us, upsetting us, the intuitive gets a chance to come forth, and we get to hear it. And very often, it will bring with it a very creative or innovative way of solving a problem or moving forward or finding some freedom here that we had not thought about. So it benefits us. That's why meditation is valuable and important and helps create peace, because meditation is quieting that ego mind and letting the intuitive mind come up and out a bit. When we are controlling, and I know this is one of my issues, I struggle with this all the time, there is usually a fear behind it. And so we need to ask ourselves if we want to shift this a bit in ourselves, what is the fear? Try to go underneath this and find out what is the fear. It's the fear of holding on or wanting something to be a certain way or wanting someone to be a certain way. It's important that our kids get good grades. We're frightened if they don't. Or if they don't get the accolades or aren't chosen for the soccer team. Or your husband doesn't get the raise. And on and on and on. And so we try to control situations. Or that our house has to look perfect when people come over. You know. And who is really expecting it to look that way? I think this is very, very difficult. This need to control. As the world becomes more chaotic, I think we find more and more of us that feel we need to keep a semblance of balance and sanity. And so this shows up in our life. Again, the wisdom of releasing is very powerful. Do what we can do, but understand that really and truly chaos is the name of the game, and change is the name of the game for moving ahead in this life. So we have order, we have chaos. we have stability, we have change. That is the path here, and that is pretty constant. And when we fight that, and we push uphill with that, what happens to us is that we get sick. And enough stress and anxiety not only destroys our precious cell tissue, but it can kill us. It really can. And fear is usually underneath all of this. The last, let's say, challenge, I think is one of the biggest. And I know for me, I have to remind myself 100 times a day. And that's forgiveness. Forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is interesting. It's an interesting concept in our particular culture. Because the way we're raised is we're basically taught here that if I forgive you, I am saying that what you did does not matter. Or even more, what you did to me makes me not matter. This is not forgiveness. And if you're challenged with this, I want to recommend to you Colin Tippon's book, Radical Forgiveness, which is incredibly powerful and a wonderful read on this topic. So forgiveness does not really mean that at all. Forgiveness is a very selfish act. Why? Because it keeps me healthy. It keeps me healthy. And when I think back about something someone did to me, might be a year ago, might be 10 years ago, my cell tissue does not know that this thing happened 10 years ago. Because the thoughts and the feelings rush back into me, and that poison is going again through my system, as if it was happening in this moment. And I am destroying myself. And many times, the person who did this to us doesn't even remember us anymore. And we're still carrying this stuff in us. It's not a loving act. It's not loving to ourselves. The flip side of forgiveness is guilt. When the Dalai Lama first came to the United States years ago, it was his first visit. He was here for about a month, and he traveled the country, and he just loved the people, and he loved the U.S. And he was asked by a reporter, what do you think of America? What do you think of the United States? And he said, I love it. I love the people. He said, but there's something I don't understand about Americans. What is this guilt that everybody carries? What is this thing? He said, we don't even have a word for it in the Tibetan language. It is so unhealthy. If you can do something, if you can make amends, fine, do it. Nobody's telling you not to do what you feel you need to do. But then release it, because it does take away our peace of mind, and it destroys us inside. It is not loving to ourselves. So, Marianne Williamson, the interfaith minister, says just because I forgive you doesn't mean we have to go to lunch, right? Yeah. Nobody's telling you to get back into a relationship that's unhealthy. Forgiveness is an interior job. It doesn't necessitate that we do anything in the outer world if we don't want to. This peace of mind and body and what we radiate into the world is a choice we make. It's a choice we make. Remembering that we house that loving spirit within us, that connection to our Creator. In the metaphysical world, the students of metaphysics, New Thought, which of course our Unity Church is an integral part of, teaches us that our divine creator, the Mother, Father, God of all of us, is loving, compassionate, patient, and forgiving. Most of us have experienced this one time or another in our lives, and we are so grateful for this. This is the pattern that we have. This is the pattern for us to follow. This is the road to peace. We are lucky to have this pattern. Consider using this pattern down the road to peace. Thank you.
Love side by side. We have stood in the rain. We have good in our hearts, love together.